I'm Mark Samos. I'm a songwriter and I'm a teacher of songwriting. I teach at Berklee College of Music, one of the great music colleges of the world. And last year, a labor of love of mine finally came to fruition. It's a book called Songwriting Strategies, a 360-degree approach, published by Berkeley Press, Hal Leonard. I'm proud of this book, and it reflects a very personal philosophy of songwriting, approach to songwriting that I've developed over many years. I brought this approach to my teaching at Berkeley, and then it was enriched by a number of years of integrating my approach as a writer and as a teacher with the approaches that I learned from my faculty colleagues, and also developing them, exploring them with the great student writers that I met at Berkeley, who are now out spreading the gospel of song seeds and 360-degree songwriting across the marketplace. What I am trying to teach is not one way of songwriting, but a way of seeing the space of possibilities for songwriting in a bit more of a comprehensive and holistic way. And the metaphor I've chosen to convey that, songwriters love metaphors, so I had to find the right metaphor for songwriting. And that metaphor is what I call the songwriter's compass. And those aspects of lyric, melody, and harmony are three of the four directions of that compass. The fourth being this mysterious thing called rhythm that I had to learn quite a bit about in the course of writing the book. When you have to live by your own theory, you discover things you didn't even know were there, hidden in the ideas that you've been developing. Almost like writing a song and discovering what it is you're trying to say in the course of writing the song. One of the delights of this approach is that every one of these different pathways into writing a song has very actionable kinds of skills and techniques that you can practice and develop. This approach really lends itself to a workshop format because it's all about developing the skills to travel different alternative pathways for writing songs. It actually turns into exercises and games that you can practice to get better at that sometimes kind of quirky way of writing songs. Those crazy things all fit into a beautiful kind of dance that I've tried to capture with this metaphor of the songwriter's compass. So let's take a look at a couple of the ways that in a workshop setting we can actually play with these elements. To practice this kind of cross-training, I try to do exactly what Ken was saying that he did and that he's a little frustrated by. We'll talk a little bit later about maybe why he's frustrated and how he can move on to the next step. But the first step that he's doing is actually really good, which is that he's gathered lots of little snippets. And not only lots of little snippets, he's gathered lots of little snippets of melodies. Now, I believe every time you do that, you are practicing, training your mind to hear, what are the melodies I like? What are the melodies that delight my ear? Why did that melody appeal to me so that I put it on my recorder? And you have to try to capture I believe, seeds in all of these different directions. Let's take a lyric song seed as a starting point, and maybe I'll just throw it into the hopper. Just because you can, don't mean you should. Everyone heard that idea? Right? I got that. That's a seed that I just gathered. Now, no one gets to write that song but me. I'm using it only for demonstration purposes, but let's just mess with it a little bit. It's a good lyric seed, but it's not yet set to a rhythm. It has a kind of an inherent rhythm in it. I might go, just because you can, don't mean you should. Sure, let's get it. That's a good suggestion. Mean you should.
Just because you can, don't 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 because he actually changed the pulse that we were, he changed not the time signature, but the groove. He put a little bit more swing into it. What happens is instinctively you pick a time signature, you pick a tempo, and you pick a groove, and all of your lyrics will glue into that because that's kind of what your body is feeling. And you want to make sure that those choices actually are serving the need of the song. And in revision and polishing, sometimes what you want to do is deliberately change those things and see what that does. Like, oh, maybe I've actually been saying this lyric too slow and I need to kick it up.
Just because you can, don't mean you should.
See how there's an attitude in that?
Just because you can, don't mean you should. Just because you can, don't mean you should.
Just because you can don't mean you should.
Now,
Just because you can don't mean you should.
now notice, no, I'm glad this happened because you see, you might think, oh, if I can do it with rhythm and melody, I'm more on my way to a song, right? That's got to be good. In my weird theory, it's actually good to train yourself to pull that melody away and just do just the rhythmic version. Just because you can don't mean you should. Okay, now let's take the melody away. Just because you can don't mean you should.
Just because you can, don't mean you should.
Let's un-R2-D2-ize it and say it in that rhythm the way you would mean it if you said it that way. Just because you can don't mean you should.
Just because you can, don't mean you should.
We can now go from that rhythmic setting to the melody that is there. Just because you can don't mean you should. Say that with me.
Just because you can, don't mean you should.
Just because you can don't mean you should. Now wave your hands in the air, up and down. Just because you can don't mean you should. Just because you can don't mean you should. Just because you can don't mean you should. Now that melody comes out of that rhythmic setting, and it's a different melody than the melody you started with. If your brain is trying to invent the words and the rhythm and the melody all at the same time, something's going to give. And the thing you're paying attention to will have the energy and the interest, and the other stuff will tend to be kind of filler, because we just can't think of three things all at once. So there's nothing wrong with that, except that very, very quickly we latch onto the thing that is filler, and we go, and that's the melody, and you won't think to go back and change it.
Just because you can't don't mean you should.
Everybody.
Just because you can, don't mean you should.
Now, something in all the different rhythms that are putting can against should. So what's happening here is that Barbara had a cool rhythmic seed idea.
Yes, very cool.
And she took that rhythmic seed idea and my lyric seed idea, and she slapped them together and said, let's see what happens. And sometimes cool stuff happens when you do that, and sometimes it's weird. You might almost say, could you put a really strong counter rhythm to the lyric and use that? You could, but just because you can. It's not like there is a single meaning to a line and your job is to make that meaning clear. You discover the meaning as you play with the line rhythmically.
Just because you can, don't mean you
should. Let's add a little ole swing. Just because you
can, don't mean you
should. Now take the words away. Da 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 da. Remember that rhythm. We'll come back to it when we finish the circle.
Where's my cell phone?
And
I remember it.
that's why these are games. See, and you have to this is not about right or wrong in terms of the ultimate song. It's sort of like, this is a really hard thing to get your brain to do, isn't it? But boy, if you do it, like your control over the rhythmic setting of your lyrics would be, can you see what it would do for you?